Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
What's up, everybody? This is your co host, Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror loving cinephile. I'm just your average podcast producing badass.
I'm John Thomas. Some would say that I go a little too far with my love of all things horror, paranormal, and meta, but I say, talk nerdy to me, and I'm all yours.
I'm BJ Sewura, an aspiring paranormal musician who plays live for the dead because the living just doesn't want to hear me.
The Dead of Winter Horror Network and Nick Kane from the 508 Productions invite you to endure the most terrifying immersive experience in all of podcasting. Beneath the Red Umbrella, now available wherever you listen to podcasts. Beneath the Red Umbrella, when the snow falls, the killing season begins.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and all of our spiritual pals out there? In today's episode, we'll be diving into the world of Haitian Vodou with special guest Houngan James. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks very much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm sure I slaughtered that already. So, for our listeners, how do you properly pronounce that?
Say Houngan.
Houngan. So, what is a Houngan?
So Haitian Vodou has various streams within it, various initiatory traditions. Some are found within families, some are found in wider groups. I initiated into a specific tradition called the asogwe lineages, which are newer. They date back to about the 1920s. And Houngan is a term that's used for a priest. It's not the only term used for priest, depending on where you are in Haiti, but you can easily translate a priest. You're on the right pathway there. Women are called mambo, and mambo is a priestess.
Now, being a priest is a pretty high designation in most, spiritual aspects of different religions and spiritualities. How long did it take you before you could be considered a Haitian priest?
Well, I served the spirits, served the Loa, learned and that for several years. One of the things we do in Haitian Vodou is it's not always up to us to make the decisions in these sorts of things. The spirits are consulted, the spirits have their say, the spirits have their will. So in late 2016, they came to the point where I was being pressured to go through Kanzo. Kanzo is the form of initiation in this type of Vodou. It's a 2-week long cycle of ceremonies. I was being pressured to go. And eventually they provided the funding, everything else that was needed. I went through those ceremonies. But becoming a priest or priestess in this tradition is sort of like being accepted to medical school. You've gotten in, right? But you're not a doctor yet. There's all the training you have to do, the learning, the knowledge you have to gain before you can finally get to that point of becoming a physician. And the same applies for us. Going through the Kanzo rites of initiation is literally a beginning to what's meant to be a lifelong path after that.
It seems like it is a lot to go through. What first brought you to that? Like, what was the draw for you to join this way of life?
Well, for me, I've had a lifelong practice in various forms of spirituality. When I was much younger, I initially started off with Western forms of witchcraft, stemming out of Great Britain and so on. Where it was a magical practice, but also wrapped up in a spiritual path as well. As opposed to a strict kind of occultism. It was occultism with a purpose, I like to call it. And over time, I studied and I learned about a great deal of other paths, everywhere from Sufism in Islam to mystical forms of Buddhism and so on and so forth. Just wanted to learn it all. And eventually, I started having dreams. And in these paths, dreams tend to be very important as signposts, messages, signifiers. And there were symbols that were appearing in my dreams that I didn't recognize. So I would sketch them as I woke up. And eventually, in the late 90s, I got to talking on a chat program called ICQ, which I don't think is around anymore. But I got to talking to a woman who was the daughter of a famous Hugon named Max Beauvoir, who was a Haitian biochemist. And I was sending her pictures of some of these images, and she recognized what they were. They were veves, which are drawings or symbols done in cornmeal and such that represent some of the spirits we serve. So she spot one and says, well, that's the symbol of Mambo Aiza, who was the first priestess and the mother of priesthood. This one is for this spirit, this one's for that spirit. So of course, realizing at that point that I was dreaming about these spirits without knowing, dreaming about these symbols and having them come up, I started to dive into it deeper. And then over years of putting time in, I eventually started to connect with some people in the community, found folks I could learn from, and then the rest was history from there. So I would look back on it and say that so much of my life was steering me towards this long before I ever really knew much about it.
Being that you're based out of Nova Scotia, did you find it difficult to find resources into diving into Haitian Vodou? Or did you find because it was along your path that the resources came a little bit more, I don't want to say quicker, but a little bit more serendipitous than maybe if someone else was just curious?
Well, something's popped up for me fairly easily. I'm an academic. I have a graduate degree in comparative religion and theology. So I had access to databases, on anthropological studies, ethnographic materials, and so on. So I was able to approach things from that point of view. But Haitian Vodou is not something that we practice on our own. It's community focused, with an understanding that the community is more than just people. It also includes plants, animals, spirits. So you really do need to connect with people within. So as time went on, social media was easy, made it a bit easier because people were more present, more out there. It was easy to make contacts. But the first little while was difficult, But I occupied my time learning as much as I could about Haitian history, kind of the background there. Then outside of Haiti, you do have strong Haitian populations in and around New Orleans, Montreal, um, Boston, Miami. So it was just starting to meet people and finding the right people to connect with, the right Hougans and Mambos, and until eventually I found a house where I was comfortable and was able to proceed on from there. So some things presented themselves on the academic side easily. Other things, it was blood, sweat, and tears, trying to find them.
Is this kind of practice when you're meeting these people? Is it like an expensive endeavor? I mean, obviously the travel expenses alone, probably, and where you're staying and all of that. Is it a pretty expensive thing to get into?
It could be, the folks with whom I conjured, with whom I initiated, were based in a place called Haute-Latham, which is in the northwest area of Port-au-Prince in Haiti. But they also lived in New Orleans. Mambo Marie was the lady who initiated me. She's my mother, my spiritual mother. So spending time with her and her crew meant traveling to New Orleans. I've also attended fetes in Mississippi. Fetes are voodoo ceremonies. Fete just means party, but that's what the ceremonies are called. I've attended in Mississippi, New Orleans, I've been in Haiti, Boston. So there is an expense there because you do have to travel. Now, if you live in an area with a Haitian population, then obviously you get to avoid that. But coming in as an outsider, as a non-Haitian, uh, the worst part isn't the financial expense. It's the fact that you do have to earn that trust. You have to earn a degree of respect. You have to show that you're not a tourist. You have to show that you're not somebody who's coming just to take advantage of the culture to make a name for yourself, make some money, um, collect titles, so on and so forth. And as you can well imagine, the first free black republic in the world has certainly experienced a whole lot of crap when it comes to white folks over the years, right? So there can be resistance at time um, until you get to the point where you've demonstrated well enough that you're not here as a game, you're not here for a cheap thrill, you're here and you mean it.
Did you find that they were a little bit more receptive because you did connect with a mambo and she did help you identify the spiritual symbols within your dreams that were connected to the spirits? Or did that really didn't have an impact on the acceptance?
Well, that helped. Because when I first got to talking to Mamba Marie and some of Marie's other godchildren who are my family members, right? Being able to approach them and say, this is what I dreamed, this is what I found out about it, and this is what I've done about it subsequently. It was helpful in demonstrating that I was actually serious about doing something. I wasn't just sitting here looking to have my ego stroked or anything like that. So that made a big difference there. It also meant I could sit down and I could openly discuss what had gone on. So the spirit, I dream about Mambo Aizal, the mother of initiates. I could at least talk and dialogue about that. If you're Haitian and you grow up in this community, you know all this stuff in the same way somebody growing up in the United States knows stories like Robin Hood or Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella. Like they're cultural bedrock, things that we inherit and things that we hear from the time we're children. So you have a lot of catching up to do. But having already spoken to other Mambos, found out a little bit about what was going on, I came in a little bit better equipped rather than being a complete newbie. That helped quite a bit.
Now, you write, and which I completely appreciate, you write a lot about the Haitian Vodou from your perspective on your website, Law and Order. And I loved your comparison in your one post of the difference in Haitian Vodou, and even Vodou in particular, or in general, I should say, and comparing it to Christmas, how everybody participates and celebrates Christmas differently in their own tradition, just based on families. And it really kind of helped me understand, at least on a very basic aspect, the differences within Vodou itself. Now, in order to practice Haitian Vodou and be at the level that you're at, did you have to deep dive into the different lineages of Vodou?
Generally, no. Um, what you want to do when you're learning is you want to study and learn from the particular folks that you're learning from. Um, so to give a little background, these different lineages, as I mentioned, I come from what are called the asogwe lineages. They're pretty well known outside of Haiti because, firstly, they're heavily based around Port-au-Prince. And for that reason, they were accessible to anthropologists and sociologists and folks who wanted to fly into the country and study them. That means a lot of the materials that they're written are based on these particular forms of Vodou, but they're not the oldest forms in the country. There are older lineages that we call Deka or Cha-Cha or Makut, depending what name people want to use for them, that are generally inherited through family lines. So if you can think about how your family is going to have certain things that you do as a family, you'll have certain things that are nobody else's business, like your tax returns within the family, your bank records, what your grandfather got up to. That's the dirty family secret. That's nobody else's business. So you can't really lineage hop in the same way. You can at some point move to a different lineage or study a different one if those folks allow you to. But the main thing you focus on is the folks who have brought you in, and you're basically learning the traditions, the stories, the spirits of that family. So that's where it becomes important to focus.
Go ahead, BJ.
Well, there's so many things I want to get into. It's like the meat of it, right? Like for me, music, right? There's I could go music, I could go into dreams. There's so many places I want to go. But for me, music has kind of been a big draw for me lately, when trying to connect with spirits when we're doing paranormal investigations and things like that. Which is, I feel like music is its own language, right? It's math, it's all of these things, and it's universal. And I think that with voodoo, it's very very particular, right? With the drum beats, with the I've been reading up on it, just the different, and the drums don't even start it, right? Like it's these songs, it's these you're building that bridge to connect with these spirits, and then you get the drums in so that they come and they converse with you, and depending on what you're trying to bring in to heal or for whatever purpose, right? um I guess my question for you is the music always the same, based on what spirit you're trying to connect with, or are there many different types of songs or drum beats that you can use to connect with those particular spirits? And is it different from just like,
Every spirit has many different songs, right? And the
okay,
songs tell us things about the spirits. Now, in Haiti, the literacy rate is nowhere near as high as it is in Canada or the United States. And 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was lower than it is now. So, an easy way to inherit knowledge, to memorize it, to carry it on was songs. You don't have to be able to read and write to learn songs. So every spirit has numerous songs that they may cast them in a certain light, talk about specific elements of their character or of their nature, something that they may have done. When it comes to drums, the spirits are divided into various nations or various families, and different nations and different families have their own specific drum beats. So one nation is the Congo. So there are very specific rhythms that are played, and they're all polyrhythmic, right? So the drums are playing different patterns that collectively create a solid rhythm. So the Congo will have specific beats and specific rhythms. Then the Dahomey Loa will have different ones. The Gede, who are kind of spirits of death, which will be really up your guys' alley to talk about at some point here. The Gede have a rhythm called the banda, which is a very bump and grind kind of rhythm. The Nago, who are warriors, have a different rhythm. So those rhythms are a sonic signature as well for the type of spirit you're calling upon. And then there are different songs that fit different rhythms. So the music of voodoo is a huge and vast topic. An interesting thing is it's often said that Legba's the first Loa we salute in the ceremony because he's the opener of the gate, but he's not. The first spirit we salute is called Junto, who is the spirit of the drums, right? And we salute him before anything else begins. Now, the drums themselves, interestingly, because they're so sacred, those drums are initiated. They go through an initiation ceremony. And there's a form of priest that functions as a drummer who is a specialist in that, who is also initiated, and generally apprentices for years, right, to learn all the drum beats, to learn when to flip between them, when to move between them, and then how to modify them to drum that possession into place, to bring the spirit into possessing a servant at the ceremony. So the amount that goes into just the musical side of things is absolutely vast. Hence, you have specialists within the tradition, specialists in drumming, specialists in singing. Every societe or voodoo society, which is like a congregation, has a specific person whose job it is to learn all the songs, right? So they can sing all the songs for all the spirits, lead everybody else present singing them, um, know which song to bring in next. Some songs call a spirit, some songs sustain their presence, other songs send them away. So the amount of knowledge there is just incredible, right? So music is a topic you can dive into for the rest of your life in voodoo and never exhaust it.
Now, the instruments, the drums, have to be initiated in. Is there something that has to be done to them because they are sacred once they're retired?
Well, every phase of the drum's life has something associated with it. When a tree is cut to make the drum, there's ceremonies associated with it. When it's carved and made into a drum, there's ceremonies. Depending on the kind of spirit it's going to call, some houses will use a different animal to make the drum skin. So cows for one particular nation, goats for another particular nation. Um, and when drums get old, it really depends on the house, how they deal with it. Some will burn them to ash, others will bury them. So diversity is a huge thing in Haitian voodoo as well, which goes back to what I was saying about you learn the traditions of your own family, right? Because it's going to change village to village, region to region within Haiti. So a spirit that may be served in the village where you grew up may be completely unknown, 30 miles away.
You were talking about earlier about the different spirits, the different ones that there's one in particular that we would be interested in. Um, could you get into that a little bit? You said it was with the is it with the death? Or,
Sure thing. So this will be an image that's probably familiar to you guys. Coming from a shared background you all have of a love for horror and that sort of thing, because these images get shown. So we have a group of spirits that are funerary spirits, spirits that rule over the dead that are present in the cemetery. Um, and one of the best known images that comes from voodoo outside of the tradition is a fellow called Baron Samedi. And so you may see images of him. He's got the top hat or the bowler, skull face, formal jacket with tails. Um, he's one of the rulers over the cemetery. He has a specific role he plays. Um, you can't really escape that imagery, depending where you go. Even a James Bond movie had him as a villain, a fellow that was done up as him as a villain. So Baron Samedi rules over the cemetery along with other barons, Baron Lacroix, for example, a Baron Cimetier. So these are all barons who rule over the dead. So the spirits of the dead in that nation are called the Gede. And now, if you ever go to a voodoo ceremony, it's a fete for the Gede. You'll find out exactly why they're so beloved because they can be very clownish. Um, because they're dead, they're past any sort of consequence, and they know it, right? So they're not concerned about punishment or anything else. They represent death, but you can't separate death from life. So they also represent life and the ongoing things that sustain it. So fertility, sexuality, and they get incredibly amused by the fact that human beings will use sex to sell anything, right? But we don't actually want to admit that's what we're doing, you know. And they will make fun of you constantly for it. So I mentioned they have a drum beat called the banda that's very bump and grind. Well, the dance they do when they come into possession is very bump and grind. So if you can imagine you're at a voodoo ceremony, you've never been there before, you're learning what's going on. Suddenly somebody starts going into what we call a crisis. They're shaking and the spirit settles into them. They tie some purple on them. They powder their face to represent the pallor of death. They throw this hat on them, maybe give them a cane that's carved to look like a penis. And the next thing you know, the spirit is right up against you, just grinding on you, right? Um, they'll do these things. They'll make constant off-color jokes. So one popular one in Haitian Creole, the word for eyeglasses is linette, which comes from the French lunette, just means glasses. But the term for certain parts of a woman's anatomy is languette. So because the word sounds similar, they'll come up to somebody with glasses and say the equivalent, that's a big languette you have on your face, right? Making a pun, right? So they'll constantly do these things because they have no fear of punishment. They've been through death. They've been through what can happen to them. Fête Gede becomes almost like Christmas in the voodoo community. It's the ceremony that everybody wants to attend. If you're only going to go to one ceremony this year, go to Fête Gede. So that interaction of death with the world of the living is absolutely tremendous. Now you guys have all seen the Child's Play movies, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So Chucky's invocation, to move him from one body to the next, he calls on a Loa Dambala. And you give me the power, Dambala, I beg of you. And it's ridiculous because Dambala would be the last spirit in the world. You'd go to for something like that. Dambala is a great white serpent. He's king of the spirits. He is the lord of wisdom, peace, compassion, kindness. He is the most chill of all the spirits. He was the
He's the
last one you
opposite.
would go to. So exactly the opposite. So when we watch something like Child's Play and Dambala comes up, we're all laughing. It's the worst one you could pick as an example, right? But if they had gone to a spirit like Baron Samedi, for example, that would have fit the theme of the show, theme of the movie a little more. If you guys have seen American Horror Story, the third season, Coven, which is all about the witches and voodoo practitioners in New Orleans, that one really pissed off the voodoo community. And the reason being that Marie Laveau in it, she speaks to the spirit Legba, and he comes out with a top hat and his face, and doing bumps of cocaine and asking for baby sacrifices. Legba is not that spirit at all. He's a kind and gentle old man who kind of guards the gate between the worlds, and he opens it, which is why we call him at the beginning of ceremonies, to open the path for other spirits to come through. Now there's a spirit. Now, if they had called him Baron Samedi, we might have said, okay, that's a bit more in his character. Maybe not the baby sacrificing, but the threatening, ominous nature might have been there. Or even a spirit named Kalfu. And Kalfu is the spirit of the crossroads, where all magic flows between the worlds, completely amoral. I describe Kalfu as being like gravity. If you step off the roof and fall and break your legs, it's not gravity's fault. You did something stupid. Gravity just does what it does. And Kalfu, that spirit in the crossroads, is very, very similar, but has this ominous reputation among some people because they find him intimidating or frightening. But yeah, the Gede are, as spirits of the dead, are absolutely kind of the life of the party when they come.
I mean, those sound like my kind of spirits. I'm not gonna
Right.
lie. I looked up the Baron Samedi and I'm just like, I'd party with him.
Right. You see, Baron Samedi has a wife as well, Mama
I party
Brigitte,
with her too.
right? And Brigitte's the queen of the cemetery. You know, so there was one great story I heard from a voodoo practitioner I knew in Haiti. The fellow was a gay man, and being gay or lesbian, voodoo doesn't care about it, but Haitian culture is still very divided. You know, just like North American culture is. Some people are homophobic, some people aren't. And anyway, this gentleman got possessed, and possessed by Baron Samedi. And during the possession, somebody yelled at him, "Why are you possessing that Masisi?" And Masisi is a word that means gay, but not in a polite way.
Mm.
And the Baron answered him. He says, "My horse may be a Masisi, but I fuck the beautiful Mama Brigitte." You know, so it's the language they'll use and the things they'll say. You know, there is absolutely no shame. You know, as I say, they're past concern for punishment from anything we could do to them.
Now, what's the significance of the color purple in Haitian Vodou?
That's the Gede's color. So each spirit has their own color. Each nation may have a color that goes for the whole nation. So the Rada spirits, for example, who tend to be older, cooler, more laid back, tend to be. Generally, they all take white as a color for the most part, with the secondary one for themselves. So Iziri Freda, who is love and luxury and hyper femininity, will take white and pink, for example, in many houses. Red is a color given to the petrol spirits, who are fiercer, hotter, quicker, tougher to deal with sometimes. And the Gede, the spirit of the dead, will take black, purple, and white. There aren't a lot of spirits outside of the Gede who will take purple. There's one form of Legba Vajabowa, who's the wanderer over the roads, knows all the roads and paths of the world. He takes gold and purple, but he's as far as you can get from a spirit of the dead.
Now, if I'm wanting to connect with this specific spirit as a Haitian Vodou practitioner, would I want to put on those colors to kind of help uh, increase the strength of that like attraction? Or is that involved in the ritual, or does that not really matter?
Yeah, the colors come into it. We'll make offerings in those colors and maybe light a candle for a spirit in those colors, or for setting up an altar for them, drape it in their colors. If you watch videos on YouTube of Haitian voodoo ceremonies, you'll often see a lot of the people wearing the same color. So it's for a fete gede, they'll be wearing black and purple, in honor of those spirits. If it's for a spirit like a Iziri Danto, who is a fierce mother, the she bear, they'll be wearing colors that are hers, like red and blue. Right, so the colors are used to draw them in. They're used to decorate. We can get into all sorts of like theological ideas behind it, why people think certain colors do certain things, but the reality is the spirits tend to like those colors, right? So you can use those colors in your clothing. Um, if it's the day that your house serves the Gede, you could dress in their colors, for example, just as a way to honor them and to show them respect.
I wonder if the colors, because that's another thing that I've been dabbling with music, is that some people can see in colors, right? Or they say they can see in colors and see the music in colors, right? See the notes. I wonder if that's part of it. If there's some kind of vibe or tonal thing that's like, well, in G minor, it's somber, it's purple, it's there might be something connected that way. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like um I don't know, is that some part of it? Does music come into the color, or is that just kind of a different representation altogether?
I've never really considered the idea, the whole thing of synesthesia, seeing the colors, or smelling the sounds, or what have you. And I wonder if maybe there is somewhere back in history a connection between the colors assigned and the drum beats, the specific rhythms or such that go. I honestly couldn't say, unfortunately, but now that's going to bother me for weeks. So I try, I try to find something about it, right?
It's interesting though to think about, because you're like, man, I don't know, because I'm a very visual learner and I'm learning how to play an instrument, and then sometimes I'm like, ooh, well, this note visually to me it looks like it's purple, like it feels like it should be purple, right? And I feel like, I don't know, maybe some cultures use that, or maybe it's inherent in something, but it's not really spoken, like it's just like a cultural norm that's just part of it. But I don't know, I'm not sure.
I mean, it's all frequencies and vibrations, right? So perhaps the color and the songs vibrate at a similar frequency that maybe the entity spirit itself also vibrates at. Uh, Possibly.
Yeah,
It
like the
certainly
color
could be.
temperature. The Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Right, and where BJ mentioned there the different cultures, that's an important point about Haitian voodoo as well, is that because it developed in the milieu of the triangle trade and slavery in the Caribbean, the Haitian people descend not from one particular African people, but from a whole bunch. You know, everywhere from the Congo to Benin in West Africa, um, Nigeria, Senegal, people brought from all these different lands and brought into one country. So there's a blending that occurred, a blending of all these different African traditions, all these different African spirits and beliefs that all kind of came together into a mix. And then threw in Taino, who were the indigenous people on the island, that got mixed in, and then Roman Catholicism got mixed in. And as time went on, Freemasonry got mixed in. Um, then you have Western occultism. Some strains come in from that, especially in the 1800s. Some grimoires and such have an influence. So there's this entire cross-cultural foundation to everything that goes on in Haitian voodoo, which makes it distinct and different from what's still done in West Africa today. And again, distinct and different from how things are done in New Orleans. Was at the time the slave trade was bringing human beings to New Orleans, they were drawing from lesser or smaller ranges within Africa. So it was less sources being brought together. So there is a whole different variation there that's based in culture as well.
Now, during the ceremonies that you've participated in, have you ever experienced having a spirit possess you?
I've had what's called a passe. So a passe is when they come onto you, but they don't fully mount. Um, the reason that I've avoided the full mounting is because we have certain precautions we can take to prevent that mounting from occurring. Generally, part of our job is to serve as a horse, which is we use the equestrian imagery there of a person riding their horse, person's mounted by the spirit. I take those precautions because I don't live near a Haitian community, so I can't attend ceremonies every week or every month. I have to travel, so my ability to attend is lessened. So if I'm going to take all the time to travel to go so I can talk to the spirits, I can't speak to them if they're in my head,
Hmm.
right? So I go out of my way to try and avoid that. And I take all the precautions necessary to avoid that, strictly for kind of selfish reasons. Because I travel all this way, I want to talk to them, I want to interact with them, right? But I have had a few moments when I've been gone, completely gone, don't remember a thing, wake up on the floor, people picking me up. Um, Folks who go through possessions often report the same thing. They say they don't remember a thing that happened. So there's an interesting thing about that. When we talk about the soul in Haitian Vodou, we don't think of it the same way it's thought of in Western culture, where it's like one thing, you die and your soul goes to heaven or whatever. There's multiple parts to it. So the part of you that gets pushed out of the way is called the T-bon ange, the little good angel, and that's who you are. That's your memories, your thoughts, your volition. All of that gets knocked out of you. It's like the driver being pulled out of a car and somebody else gets in the car. That somebody else is the spirit. So you don't remember anything that happened because you weren't there. So I've had those moments where I'm forehead to forehead with the spirit and they're shaking me around or rocking me around. The next thing I know, I'm waking up on the floor. Somebody's picking me up. And I don't know if it's been 10 seconds, if it's been 10 minutes, you know, so you don't really know. But that brings us towards an interesting thing, which is understanding another thing common to horror fans, which is zombies. We can't really we can't talk we can't talk about horror and voodoo without getting into zombies. So an interesting thing about learning Haitian voodoo is having to understand that it has a very different framework, a cultural framework and a language to it that's very, very different from what we understand. So if you walked into, you know, a psychologist's office or any form of Western educated scientist's office and you said, the Bokor stole that man's soul, hit him with a powder, stole his soul, and made him into a zombie. They're going to look at you like you're a case study in something, right? That phrasing doesn't make sense. It reeks of primitive superstition to the educated Western scientific mind. Excuse me. But the reason it does is because we don't understand what's actually being said. So if they say the Bokor stole his soul, what they mean is that part of you, that T-bone ange, that piece of your soul that represents your thoughts, your memories, your volition. So we could take that phrase, the Bokor hit him with a powder and stole his soul and made him into a zombie, and we could say to a Western educated physician, a noxious substance was administered that took away volition, that caused retrograde amnesia in the subject and made him very susceptible to suggestion. And a Western scientist, yeah, that makes total sense. Absolutely. We have drugs that can do that now. There's hypnotics and there's scopolamine and all these other sorts of things that can do that. So what the Haitian is saying when he says that first phrase and what the scientist is saying with the second, it means the same thing. It's just you have to learn that the way they're expressed in Haitian culture versus Western culture is different, but the meaning is still there, right? So when we talk about a zombie, you know, it's not literally a dead person who came crawling out of the grave. So I'll tell you guys a fun story here because this will appeal to you. Have you guys seen The Serpent and the Rainbow?
Yes.
That movie totally freaked me out as a kid.
All right, so
But
here's the
yes.
background. Back in round about, I guess it would have been or first half of the 1900s anyway, a fellow in Haiti named Clavius Narcisse died. They had his death certificate, medical examination, buried him. Right, years later, 12, 13, 14 years later, he comes wandering back into the town where he's from. And he goes and he finds family members of his and he says, "It's me, I'm back." You know, but we buried you. And he says, "Well, this was my childhood nickname," and starts telling them family secrets, you know, stuff that people outside the family wouldn't know. And so, oh my God, it's him. What the hell happened? So he tells them that what happened to him was he had done something, and somebody sent him to the Bokol, right? Which is like the sorcerer. It's a complex term that can mean a lot of things, but we'll say a sorcerer. And he was hit with this powder, so that he remembers the death examination, remembers being pronounced dead. He said he was completely awake and aware, but he couldn't move, totally paralyzed. So they took him off and they buried him, and he remembered all of that being buried. And after being buried for a day or two, they dug him up, they hit him with some more powder, they took him off and they enslaved him, continuing to put this powder on him, right? And then eventually the person who had enslaved him died and was no longer there to keep dosing him. So eventually it wears off, he comes back to his senses, back home he goes. So when this whole thing had happened, there was a Haitian psychiatrist who contacted friends back in the US and talked to them about it. And they sent a Canadian ethnobotanist who was educated at Harvard, a guy named Wade Davis, sent him down to Haiti to investigate because they figured if there's a drug that can keep you totally awake, but you don't feel anything, you don't feel any pain, it would lessen issues with surgery. You know, the problems that could be there with surgery with putting somebody completely under. So they saw a chance to maybe make some money, and they hired this guy to go find out. So he did all this study, wrote a book called Passage to Darkness, The Ethnobiology of the Haitian Zombie, which, I mean, who wouldn't love to write a book with a title like that? He wrote that, and then he decided he would make a more mass market appeal book that kind of painted himself more as the Indiana Jones of this world, right? And he called it The Serpent and the Rainbow. Some guys bought the rights to it, and then they made a horror movie out of it, which only very loosely follows the book. So the whole point, anyway, being that cultural understanding becomes so important to understanding what's actually happening in a voodoo ceremony, what's actually being said, because it becomes very, very easy for us to fall into the trap of assuming that something is lurid, you know, something appeals to that side of us that just loves Pinhead, you know, loves Chucky, loves Jason Voorhees, right? That side of horror, when the reality is it's actually speaking to a different cultural understanding.
I feel like you just called each one of us out. You're like Pinhead, Jason, Chucky.
Oh no, nothing
You've been
intended there.
listening to us.
Well, as I was telling you
Yep.
guys before we started, I'm a massive horror fan going back to my youngest days. So if I'm calling you, and I'm calling myself out here too.
You know, the thing that I love that you call back to earlier is that when you were describing the gere, it really, for me, touches on an aspect of horror that I really like that some people are uncomfortable with, of this idea of sexuality meshing with darker things like death. And you see that prevalent in Hellraiser, right, with Pinhead. And that sometimes makes people uncomfortable. But to me, there is something there. there is, and maybe it's because it's taboo, it's forbidden, I don't know, but I love your description of the ghetto, because to me, I feel like oftentimes that's how I identify some of the horror, where I'm like, it's dark, it's deadly, but it's also sexy.
Well, that's completely at the root of anything vampire based, just about. Is that close connection between death, transcending death, sexuality. That's just rooted in the whole
Mhm.
vampire thing, and thus the whole goth subculture, at least in the '80s and such. Certain parts of the goth subculture, the very Anne Rice influence thing, there's a sexuality mingled with death, right? And or finding a beauty in decay, you know. So those
I'll
elements are
take it.
present in yeah, those are present with the Gede as well.
Yeah, I like how you talk about the Gede, and not just that, but just it just when we talk about horror, I think a lot of horror borrows things from voodoo, right? And not just but they do it wrong, right? And I'm curious about that. Like, why is it so like you talked about the American Horror Story? Why is that? Why did they borrow it but do it not do it justice, right? Like, I mean, obviously they have their own script and everything, but um, do you think that they're just using imagery? They're just taking what they want? Because I feel like the stories themselves are fascinating on their own. That they could create something horror based out of that without having to go, or would they get in trouble? Would they get in trouble if they use source material too much in that sense?
I think part of it is it's rooted in 20th century Haitian history. So for 20 years in the early 20th century, the U.S. occupied Haiti. Rolled in, took over, ran the show. And during that time, U.S. soldiers would go home and they'd write these really lurid books, exaggerating things, making things up because it was a great way to make a lot of money. Because, of course, I mean, why do we watch horror? We like to be scared. We like to face that kind of stuff. We like the vampires, the werewolves, the zombies, the mummies, the serial killers, all that kind of stuff. People just have a draw towards that sort of thing. So they would write books. Like fellow William Seabrook wrote a book called The Magic Island, for example, which talked about, voodoo, drunk jungle orgies and all this just crazy stuff that he made up. The idea of the zombie came into American culture at that point. You get old movies from the 30s like White Zombie, um, and so on and so forth. That's where these ideas come from. So it's already planted that idea that was building up on the racist elements that existed in U.S. society. Because remember that Haiti is the first slave revolution that was successful. In history, they drove the whites out, of the island. So there's always been this kind of fear because there was a ripple effect that came from that. Britain ultimately decided to abolish slavery. Various other countries abolished it. It it scared the hell out of the whole world, right? That armed with just machetes, the Haitians rose up and just took the entire country, fighting against Napoleon's armies, right, and winning. So it was terrifying. So there was always that kind of fear there. There was the ongoing prevalence of racism. I mean, this is the era of Jim Crow at the time. The Civil War had been fought. The Emancipation Proclamation had occurred, but it was still separation. So that idea of fear was there, right? So when and it's still kind of prevalent when it comes to dealing with these traditions. So when we talk about magical traditions that come from European descended folks, right? We may talk about Wicca or modern forms of Druidism, groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. There's it freaks some people out who are freaked out by anything occulty, but you can make a show like Charmed, was big in the '90s. You can make a movie like The Craft. You can make things like Practical Magic. So you can portray these forms of witchcraft as anywhere from slightly edgy for the teenagers to making romantic stories, like in Practical Magic, or going back to The Witches of Eastwick in the '80s, right? But that never happens with voodoo. When it comes to voodoo, it's always portrayed as something evil, something scary, something terrifying, right? And a lot of that is rooted in the divides that exist between white culture and black.
I think too, it's also the prevalence of the influence of Catholicism and Christianity against possession. And so, where Haitian voodoo and most aspects, I'm assuming, of the different lineages of voodoo, the spiritual possession is a positive thing. We know in Catholicism and Christianity, any kind of possession is a negative thing, because positive spirits won't possess you. It's the negative ones that do. So at least that's the portrayal, right?
Right, that's the portrayal, but terminology becomes important there too, because if the bad spirits possess you in Catholicism, the demons that it's you're possessed, we need an exorcism, I need an old priest and a young priest. The power of Christ compels you. All of this boils out. But if it's a good spirit, well, you're not possessed, you're filled with the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And now you're speaking in tongues, and you're speaking with the voice of prophecy. So coming out of the Golden Dawn and other Victorian era magic societies, there was a tongue-in-cheek phrase when somebody said, "What's the difference between white magic and black magic?" And the answer was, "White magic is what we do. Black magic is what the people we don't like do." You know, and so that same element exists there. If we're afraid of the spirits that possess you, you're possessed. You need an exorcism. If we're down with the spirits that possess you, you're filled with the Holy Spirit and you're speaking with the voice of prophecy. You know, that unfortunately is a tribalist part of who we are as human beings. There's certain things we'll accept and call holy, and there's other things we'll reject and call profane or demonic or whatever we want to. And granted, even in Vodou, we can see the same thing. Some spirits will come and possess, and there's the sweetest things in the world. Izili Freda, the one who I mentioned earlier, who is the spirit of like hyper femininity and love and luxury. You know, um, she can be so elegant when she comes, so sweet when she comes. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can piss her off, but assuming nobody's pissed her off, she's just this wonderful, loving thing. But then you can get a spirit come like Criminel, whose name literally means criminal. And you'll hear stories about we have to tie the person who's possessed hands behind his back, otherwise Criminel will start biting his arms. You know, um, there are spirits that can be fierce, spirits that can be absolutely terrifying, spirits that can be angry. And one of the beautiful things about Vodou is it doesn't shy away from human experience. So if you go to church, what's generally talked about in church is the positive, so-called positive things. We talk about love, and we talk about charity and compassion and giving, right? But we don't often talk about anger, jealousy, hate, and rage, except to condemn them. Right? But in Vodou, we acknowledge that those things have their place in the human experience. So we have Izili Freda, hyper feminine, sweet, loving, magnificent. We have her sister, Izili Danto, who I mentioned her as the fierce she bear, the mother who will cut your throat to protect her children. But then we have other sisters, Izili Ke Noa, whose name means black-hearted Izuli. She is the one who protects the abused. Will protect the battered woman, protect the abused child, and comes with more fire and fury than you could possibly imagine. You'll have warrior spirits like the Ogu, some who will come very much with the idea that I'm here to protect the downtrodden, I'm here to fight against oppression, but then other ones who are, I'm here to fight whatever you got for me to fight. You know, so just like we acknowledge life and celebrate it, we acknowledge death and we celebrate it. There's so much in between it, and the whole range of human experience gets reflected in it and not turned away from. So we may not be thrilled to see one of these spirits show up who's a bit fierce, who could be terrifying, who might wave a dagger in your face, who might yell at you. Um, we may not be as thrilled to see them show up, but they still show up, and we acknowledge them.
Is that why you guys? One thing I read is that these sometimes it lasts throughout the night and into the next day, right? And it could go for a really long time. And is that because it takes sometimes a long time to get the spirits maybe you don't want to get them away, or is it just the whole process of bringing them in and then having the just I guess the possession, I guess whatever, however you want to call it, and then sending them away? Is it just are there issues that come up, or are they all long, or are they all like hours and hours and hours?
A possession can last for a couple hours. It can last for a couple of minutes. The length of these ceremonies that often do go all night and into the next day is because there are so many spirits, and generally we're singing for each one of them. So we'll salute the drums. We'll sing for Legba to open the way. We'll sing for the Marasa, the divine twins, which is like a cosmic binary. Then Loco, the first priest. Then Aizan, the first priestess. Then it's Dambala, the great white serpent. Then Aida, the rainbow, and so on and so forth. And we go through like another 10, 15, 20 spirits, and we finish the first nation at that point. So each spirit's been had songs sung for them. They've had certain drum beats played. If they've come and they showed up and possessed somebody, they've been greeted, they've been served, given their offerings. People have come to talk to them, ask them for advice. And we've only gotten to the end of the first nation of spirits. We still have, then we have the Juba, we have the Nago, we have the Petrol, we have all these other spirits to go through. We do have ways, as priests, we have ways to send away spirits who shouldn't be there. You know, sometimes it's because it's inappropriate for a certain spirit to come. You know, um, we're here to do a healing. This is not the spirit we need for that. We can send them away. Other times, spirits, especially the Gede, like to show up when it's not their turn. You know, the Gede, we say we're all humans at one point, so they remember all the joys of life. They remember eating and drinking and smoking and sex and all that good stuff. And of course, they want to come enjoy the world again. But some spirits don't want to be around the dead. Freda, the hyper feminine one, doesn't like the dead at all. So if they're going to show up at her period in the ceremony, she's not going to come. Or if she's there, she'll leave. So we have to keep an eye out and send them away and have them come back at the appropriate time. So you can think of it as, imagine you're having a house party and you got a couple groups of friends who don't like each other. So you've planned it out and said, all right, tonight I'm going to have friend group A come over. Then later on, it's going to be friend group B. And then when we get to be about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, friend group C, because they're night owls anyway. And you can keep them separate. There's not going to be any problems. Things are going to be cool. But then a couple of your friends decide to be assholes about it and say, we know we're not wanted at this particular time, so let's go crash the party anyway, see what kind of chaos we can cause. And so that's part of the role of priests in this too, is to try and herd cats, in that particular way, and try to keep things moving on. But yeah, that's the reason these ceremonies can go on for so long. Some ceremonies in Haiti can go for days.
Now, if there are spirits that aren't responding to their songs and drum beats, do you get caught in the moment trying to get them to appear, or do you move on to the next nation?
It depends. If it's a ceremony for a particular spirit, let's say we're doing a ceremony for Agwe, who is the spirit of the sea. We want Agwe to come. It's in his honor. You want the guest of honor to come to the party. If he's not coming, we'll sing harder. The drums will go harder. We'll do everything we can to try and draw him in. You know, but not every spirit's going to come to every ceremony. We'd be at it for weeks if they did. But we generally want certain guests to come, so we'll work as hard as we can to bring them.
Can spirits multi-possess individuals?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll send you guys a video a little later on. After we're done recording in that, I'll dig it out. So Izili Danto. Remind me to tell you about marrying the spirits, because that's the thing. But
Do you say
Izili Danto.
marrying?
Oh yeah, yeah. We'll talk for that in a sec.
Okay.
So Izili Danto, that fierce protective mama bear. I was at a ceremony in, I guess it would have been December of 2022 in Florida, and she came and possessed one of the mambos, and so she's dealing with us all, yelling at me. We'll get to that story. She's giving me high holy hell, but she's doing her thing, and then got saluted by another mambo and put another iteration of Danto into that mambo. So it's that great scene in the Phantom Menace. Great, now there's two of them, right? So we had two Izili Dantos present, and I've seen one spirit, Tijan. I've seen him possess 3, 4, 5 people at once at one ceremony. So you have all of these iterations of that going around. Sometimes you'll get pranks go on. Ogu Farai, who's a soldier and a warrior, and he's kind of the hyper masculine force to Freda's hyper feminine. I've seen him show up at a ceremony in Mississippi, possess person A, and talk to everybody over here, while then possessing person B to go get up to something in the corner that he doesn't want us to know he's doing. You know, so it's difficult to try and imagine kind of splitting that, but they do it. They do it quite effectively.
So it doesn't always go to plan, I guess. I mean, not that there's there's an objective, right? There's an objective. There's, you want to contact specific spirits, and but the way they show up can be very, very variable, it sounds like.
Right. In Western traditions, we talk a lot about summoning the spirits, conjuring the spirits, evoking the spirits, whereas in Vodou we invite. You know, there's more of a we're on the level here. We can't constrain you or bind you or force you. Um, we want you to come. So it's an invitation rather than a demand. But yeah, the marrying the spirits. Um, so in many lineages, there's this concept that you can marry the Loa. You can marry certain spirits. Um, the rationales behind it tend to be fairly simple. So you marry a spirit, they're going to bring certain blessings into your life. They'll do certain things for you. In exchange, you have to provide things they want. And this is all negotiated ahead of time, right? So for men will often marry Izili Freda, the hyper feminine spirit. But if you marry her, you marry the she bear, Izili Danto as well, because they compete with each other. So you want to balance. Women will often marry Ogu Farai because he's that hyper masculine guy. He's the guy who's going to kick ass and take names and slap anybody down who gives you trouble, who's going to protect you. But because he's fierce and hot, usually marry a cooler spirit to balance him out, like Agwe, who's the sea, Dambala, the great white peaceful serpent, or Cousin, who is like the hardworking farmer. Sometimes you marry more than two. I'm married to three of them. So I'm married to Izili Freda, as you can see my rings here, I'll show you here. So I have a ring for each of those spirits. Um, this one here with the waves on it, yeah, that's for La Sirene, the mermaid. So she's the enchantress and the queen of the sea. This one here is for Izili Freda, our hyper feminine, um, princessy, loving one. And then this big one here is for Izili Danto, the fierce protective she bear. So I had mentioned earlier that Izili was at this fete, Izili Danto giving me hell. Well, there was two of them. So when I was in Haiti in 2017 going through the initiations, she showed up in possession and made it very clear to everybody I'm supposed to marry her. And I said, all right. Well, years had gone by. We got to 2022. I still hadn't done it. It's been 5 years. So
Uh-oh.
she showed up at this ceremony and just gave me high holy hell in front of everybody. Right, put me down on my knees, waving her dagger in my face because she carries a dagger, waving her dagger in my face and just shrieking at me. Why haven't I married her? So the whole thing had to get hashed out there. And then the next year, I managed to get the ceremony together and I married the three of them. Not
So you're
every
like
form,
Dracula and his three brides.
right? Um, so it's interesting the way it works. I hashed out deals with them ahead of time. Okay, what do you want from me from this marriage? And the important thing is there's a mariage loi. We marry them. There's no such thing as a divorce, right? So you marry them, you're in it. So we had to hash it out. What do you three each want from me? What do I want from you? How are we gonna benefit this? So they laid it out like the first week of every month, from the first to the seventh, is their week, which means I don't sleep next to a human being, right? I sleep alone. I have certain ceremonies I do for them. Um, if I can, on their days, I wear their colors. So I have all these extra things I do to honor them, in exchange for which they have things they have to do for me, and things that they have done. I mentioned to you guys earlier tonight that I'm living in this great, wonderful old 117-year-old house. When I married them, one of the things I told them was, I'm tired of renting. I want a house, but the housing market's insane up here. So they told me what to look for, how I would find the house, how I would recognize it was the one they wanted. And let's see, it was June 3rd of 2023 that I married them. And I moved into the house September 15th. So between that time, it was they dropped a down payment in my lap. They helped me find the house. Inspections were done, everything taken care of, and I moved. So a skeptic could look at that and say pure coincidence. But for me, from my own perspective, I say I've been through this enough over the years to understand. That to me, it's not coincidence at all. It's the presence of these wives.
So by having your spirit marriages, are you also allowed to have like human relationships?
I am, and I have a girlfriend who lives with me here. And but your spirits will screw with your life. You know, um, and they absolutely will. So I had come out of a relationship back in 2021. a very meaningful relationship, but it came apart. And for the longest time after that, whenever I try to get involved with somebody, the spirits had their say, and it was usually get out, just gone, gone, gone. And they went through this over and over and over. For them, if you can imagine, you start dating a man, and he tells you you're always going to be second place because I have these invisible women around me. You're going to be second place. Not too many women are going to be down with that. And I hadn't even married these spirits yet. But it went along. They kept knocking them out of my life. Gone, gone. One, I'd start dating one, be a couple of days, couple of dates in, she'd get sick. Nobody knows why she's sick. She goes into the hospital. Doctors can't figure it out. Then when we haven't seen each other for a few weeks, she's fine. You know, Another one's running a business. We start dating. Business starts to fall apart. She's got to focus on that like crazy. We don't talk. She's fine. So the lady I'm with now, the week before I went to Florida for the wedding, now she's been involved in some magical traditions in her life. She kind of understands this, but we had a whole chat about it. I said, you have to understand, like they have screwed people up to push them away. Um, we were sitting there having a coffee and talking, and she looked at me and she says, I want to see a lot more of you. It's cool. The next day, she calls me and she goes, I don't know what the hell happened. I can't see anything. My eyes are swollen shut like I've been around something I'm allergic to, but I haven't. I don't know what's going on. I said, well, it's obvious. You told me last night you want to see more of me. Now you can't see a damn thing. Right. So I went down, I married the spirits. And when I came back, she obviously had respect for them, having been through this. So they're cool with her being around because she doesn't interfere with that week. That's theirs. When I set up a service, do a public community service or something for these spirits, she goes and hand bakes a cake for that spirit, decorates it for them. She'll come home from work now and then with 3 bouquets of flowers, and she's like, here's the blue ones for the mermaid, the pink ones for Freda, and the red
Oh,
ones for Dante. So she understands that being part of my life is being part of these spirits as well, right? Which is rare. So to answer your question, yes, you can have a human partner, but if you've been through the JABO, that is to say you've been initiated, you become a priest, you have certain obligations, and there's no getting around them.
That's one of the obligations. You have to get married.
Not everybody does. Um,
Okay.
the spirits don't want to marry everybody. Not everybody has to marry the spirits. Sometimes in lineages that practice this, the spirits will come and say, we expect you to initiate and become a priest. But because there is so much responsibility that goes with that, sometimes marriage gets used as a compromise. So, well, I'll marry these 2 spirits or these 3 spirits, and that's it. That way, I don't have to take on the responsibilities of priesthood. I can just keep this in house. Um, Not every lineage does marriages, as I mentioned earlier. Some lineages think it's a crazy, ridiculous idea. So it really depends on the individual, what their relationship with the spirits is, and what the past or what the path forward is going to be.
are people chosen for the specific functions by the spirits, like to be priests or to be the person that is selecting the drums and playing the drums and holding the stories of the songs? Or does the individual make that choice? Or is it a mixture of both?
It's often a mixture. Generally speaking, the spirits have a plan. They
Okay.
want specific people for specific reasons. You can push back against it. You can argue and fight, but they tend to have a bigger lever than we do, and they'll wedge you around, move you around. Um, Sometimes they'll negotiate, like we were just talking about when it comes to marriage. Well, you need to be a priest. You don't want to take on that responsibility. We'll settle for a marriage, or we'll settle for this, or we'll settle for that. In the family lineages I mentioned earlier that are inherited down through family lines, there's often going to be one person in each generation who's going to have to do specific things. So in those groups, it's usually the head of your family is functioning as the priest or priestess. So it could be your grandmother, could be your grandfather. And they get towards the end of life, they're passing away. They may choose somebody to pass that role on to, in the younger generations. Or the spirits may have said this is the person who's going to do it. So it is kind of a mixture, but in that mix, the spirits are the senior partners, who really have more pull than it all.
Now we've talked about horror and how oftentimes horror twists and demonizes the reality of the practice. And I feel like oftentimes how voodoo is represented is curses and um, dark rituals and things that are often solo practices. You rarely see, group ceremony presented in pop culture. How much, and maybe you might not want to answer this, but how much of voodoo actually does involve curses and that kind of darker nature? Or is it really more of a higher vibration practice that's just being completely demonized?
Well, some people would say, oh, it's purely higher vibrational. I'm going to be honest with you here. Because it reflects human life, like I said earlier, we don't shy away from anger. We accept it as natural and human, just like love, pain, and joy. All these things are there. Um, we, not just priests, but other practitioners, will work what we call travail. Travail just means literally work. So do the work, right? Or magie, which means magic. So we work for all sorts of different things. You can work for healing, but you can work to harm. You can work for fertility. For a barren couple who's trying to have a child, you can work to try and make a fertile couple barren. You can do all these different things. Um, but the idea is morality comes into it as well. So understanding that a lot of these terms vary depending where you are in the country. We're being generic with the terms. Houngans and Mambos are supposed to serve Guinea. Guinea is a word that means both the homeland of West Africa, but also the positive side of the spiritual world. Our role is really to create and foster and maintain harmonious relationships in that community of humans, plants, animals, spirits. You do have practitioners who we say work with both hands, which are sometimes called bokors, which are like sorcerers or have other names. Those individuals can almost specialize in working on the more negative side of things. So I know, for example, how to do positive work. I also know how to do negative work. I usually prefer to work on the more positive side of things. You can think of your relationship with your spirits is kind of like water flowing down a hill. Water will carve a channel, and eventually you get a stream that becomes a river, and the water naturally flows that way. Um, your relationship with your spirits is like that. If you're constantly pushing them towards doing nastier, darker things, then you're going to have to expect that becomes their nature, you know, in dealing with you as nastier and darker. Now, when it comes to the moral side of things, I like to look at things from a different angle. So you may have somebody come to you and say, "I have this ex-boyfriend. He won't leave me alone, right? Pissing me off. I don't want to talk to him anymore. Can you do something like just smash him up, get him out of my life?" And of course, people come at you angry, but you can look at that and say, "Sure, I could do that." That's not necessarily good for anybody. Why don't I do work instead for him to find somebody he's really going to be into and who's really going to be into him, right? That way he's out of your hair, but we're not getting into this whole thing of messing somebody up and hurting somebody, right? But you still get what you want, which is him gone. Now you might come back and say, that's cool, that works. Or a little bit of self-reflection might mean maybe you don't want him gone. Maybe you just want him to suffer. Maybe that's what you come back with, right? Humans are complex. So cursing does exist, but blessing exists. For every technique there is to lay a curse, there's a technique to remove a curse. Um, it's a complex moral thing, but an important thing that comes in is we each have what's called a met-tet or head spirit, master of your head, and that is one of the spirits that owns you, basically. And the spirit that is central to your nature, that one who owns you essentially, has its own sense of morality. So if you have Damballa in your head, as we say, Damballa is your chief spirit. He's wise, he's peaceful, he's compassionate, he's chill. Then he's going to want you to move differently than if you have Izilidanto in your head, who's fierce, who carries a dagger, who's fiery. You know. So if you can imagine having a problem in your relationship, and you go to a friend of yours who's a Buddhist, you say, how should I deal with this issue? Your Buddhist friend's going to give you one kind of advice. But if you go to a friend of yours who's a Hell's Angel, right, and say, what do I do about this? You say, fuck him up, beat his ass. Why are you taking this? So you can get a different kind of advice, right? Same thing with the spirit. So the spirit that is central to you is going to have certain expectations for how you react, how you respond.
Are there spirits that you can, I don't want to say invoke, because that's me placing external words onto it, but I don't know what other word to use. Are there spirits that you can invite to help you with individual causes? For example, we have people that have come on to talk about like invoking spirits for example, Lilith to help with their sensuality, sexuality, or other entities to help with specific causes. So, are there, for example, in Haitian Vodou, can you invite a more lusty spirit to help you with your amorous life?
Absolutely. So the spirits all have their own things that they like, their own personalities. If you're looking for love work, Freda, the hyper feminine one, is fantastic for it. Freda loves love. So she's a good one you can go to. But if you're not looking for that wild rush of love, you're looking for like that long-term, settled, secure partnership. Cousin, who's like the country peasant, is a good one to go to because he and his wife are like the old married couple running a farm for the last 60 years, right? They know each other, they're secure. If you're involved in fights, scraps, warfare, there's spirits you can go to. If you need inner peace, spirits you can go to. If you're looking for prosperity, help finding a job, there's a spirit for everything, just like there's a song for everything. The spirits are themselves quite interesting. They're hard to pigeonhole. We look at Greek mythology and we say Aphrodite, goddess of love, done. Neptune, god of the sea, done. Or Poseidon, if we're talking Greek, done. Ares, god of war, done. Whereas the Lawan food are tougher to pigeonhole. So we'll take Kuzili Freda, the hyper feminine one. Yes, she likes love and luxury and charisma and all that sensual stuff. She's great with that. But we also, those of us who know her well, know that she will fuck you up if you cross her. You know, so when that old saying, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." Freda's got that in her. So there are folks who will go to Freda if they're really upset with somebody else. This person broke my heart, fucked me over. I'll get them. So I mentioned how Freda's sister Danto carries a big knife, and she waved that around. Well, Freda has a knife as well. Danto would be the type to have this knife strapped to her thigh, like this, you know, knife, Crocodile Dundee style knife, strapped to her thigh where you can see it. Whereas Freda would be the one that has the long, thin stiletto tucked in her bodice, where you don't realize it's there until she pulls it out and sticks you.
My
Right.
girl.
Right. So these spirits have multiple sides to them, right? The cooler, more relaxed spirits are probably the worst ones to deal with if you make them angry. Because by the time you've gotten to that point, you've ignored warning after warning after warning after warning, and they've had enough. The hotter, fiercer spirits, you can piss them off, but their nature is to get pissed off easily, right? So they will chill out. Um, those tend to be the ones that the younger edge lord horror fans, like we probably all were as teenagers. I know, like I was. Those are the ones that they get kind of attracted to more, because that's part of that aesthetic almost. The fierce danger, right, is part of it, right? Um, it's always Freddy Krueger is far more terrifying to see, you know, than a character from like Norman Bates, in Psycho, where he just looks like a normal guy. Oh, later you find out what he's all about. But Freddy, the second you see him, and if you've got that love of horror, there's a certain part of us that likes to deal with that visceral rawness.
Absolutely.
You're speaking our language here.
So speaking of horror movies, is there a favorite of yours that you like to watch around this time of year,
You read my mind.
Favorite horror
or
movies?
just a favorite in general?
Yeah, favorite.
Oh man,
Favorites.
see, that's so huge. There's so many. When it comes to series, there's usually a couple I'll pick out that I like. Like Friday the 13th, it's part 6, all the way. I remember sneaking into the theater to see that and laughing my butt off. The groundskeeper filling in the grave, Jason's grave. That's no longer Jason. And looking up at the camera and saying, "Some people got a strange idea of entertainment." I love the cheesy schlock B horror. But Hellraiser is a series I absolutely adore. Big fan of Hellraiser because it wasn't just the typical Jason Freddy pissed off evil guy going to screw you up. There's a bit more of a layering, a bit more of a complexity to what's going on here. Um, sort of a
This is
very
sexy
S&M
horror.
vibe.
Yeah.
Right, sexy horror, right? I do have a huge love of old horror as well. You know, the thriller type. We're talking the Boris Karloff, uh, and Bela Lugosi days, Lon Chaney Jr., the old black and white horrors. I love those too. But when it comes to around Halloween, it tends to shake up for me a little bit every year. What I feel particularly drawn to this year, and I'm feeling it's gonna be Halloween this year. Bit of a Mike Myers time to go. Really kind of enjoy that sort of thing. Um, After this, I might have to do the Serpent and the Rainbow.
Yeah.
you know, Go
Such a
dive
good
into a little
one.
bit that voodoo side. Um, and just pretty much no horror I don't like, as long as there's something interesting to it.
Which one was your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie?
Oh man, see that's hard, right? Because I loved part two. I love Freddy's Revenge. That was great because I mean I snuck in the theater and saw most of these when I was a kid, so I have memories of the crowd
Fond
and how it
memories.
was. Fond memories of the crowd and the way like there's a morality to horror movie fans that other folks don't really get. So I would sneak in to see these movies, and you know how it is. All the 80s horror series, there's always a person who survives. It's almost always a woman. She doesn't have sex, she doesn't drink, she doesn't smoke for the most part. There's this certain image that American culture created of the pure one who has to survive.
The Final Girl.
Right, the final girl. And I would see the crowds lose their shit. They would cheer at Jason, cheer at Freddy, cheer at Michael Myers, like kill that guy, get him, get him, get him, and love it. But as soon as he went for the final girl, handfuls of popcorn are being thrown at him. You cocksucker, get the fuck away from her. Like the way that just the gestalt, right? The whole collective consciousness of the crowd would leap into the final girl is ours. You don't fuck with her. She's the best of us, right? And none of us are all that great because we wouldn't be here watching this. Um, and that was something that always really, really appealed to me and drew me in was that whole kind of thing. So when I get drawn to specific horror movies this time of year or whenever, a lot of it, if it's an older movie, is remembering things that had happened. Like I like a lot of cheesy old horror that were one shots, like Nightbreed. If any of you have ever seen that Nightbreed,
Yeah.
um, absolutely love that kind of thing too. I do love the adaptations of horror that, in my books, do it right. I mean, his poor acting aside from Keanu Reeves, Bram Stoker's Dracula was pretty cool.
Hey, he did just fine.
That accent. I mean, it was
Well, okay, fair. Fair.
his accent was when he did Shakespeare, right? Forsooth, Horatio, I doth feel vexed. You know, his accent wasn't great,
I'll give you
but
that one.
but it was all practical special effects too. No CGI, none of that stuff in it. And that's one of the reasons I thought Bram Stoker's Dracula was so good,
Mhm.
was they dove into that old kind of, well, wasn't old at the time, but it was almost a passe form of movie making.
Yes.
And it's
And Gary
it's
Oldman.
just sad to see that move aside now.
How do you feel about the Lost Boys?
One of the greatest movies of the 80s, period. Um,
See, we're here. We're Hellraiser, Lost Boys, love. Yes, I knew you were one of us.
oh, absolutely. The Lost Boys it's one of those movies that's part of the zeitgeist of the 80s. You
Hmm.
can't remake that and capture the magic of it. You can't do it with Ghostbusters. I don't care how often they try. You can't do it with the Lost Boys. I mean, you'd be laughed at the theater if shirtless saxophone guy popped up. It just wouldn't fit in the kind of movies we make today. But there's an 80s aesthetic that went with it. There were certain cultural foundations in the 80s that informed the horror, like The Final Girl,
Hmm.
right? Like there was just certain ideas that went into our horror about what was cool, what wasn't, what was going to, fit in, what wasn't. Um, like I love death metal too, but death metal doesn't really go on an 80s style horror soundtrack, but Motley Crue does, or Twisted Sister does. They were kind of that 80s hair metal was part of the whole aesthetic and all kind of woven there too. And I do miss those days, when I was a kid back then, and sneaking into these movies, 8, 9, 10 years old, and sneaking in to go see Freddy. But yeah, The Lost Boys, absolutely fantastic. Made me question my Chinese food for a long time.
They're only noodles, Michael.
Exactly right. Um, Now, how about you guys? You guys are all horror fans. Is there any particular thing you guys like to watch as a crew? Right? Any particular
As
movie
a
you guys watch, or
crew.
do you guys like to watch one person loves while the other guys shred it?
We all love the Lost Boys. So last year we went, they were doing, Alamo Draft House here was doing a watch party of the Lost Boys. So we went to that and they gave us a box, the Chinese food takeout boxes. And that was fun. It had, what was that? It was
Gummy
like,
worms.
and the sanitizer, but they wrote it as like holy water or
Yep.
something. It was,
Yep.
it was fun. I had so much fun at that. Definitely the Lost Boys. I'm a huge Fright Night fan. So during Halloween, Fright Night has to come on. Jerry Dandridge, Chris Sarandon, not the remake, whatever that was. That was junk. I don't even count that. But yeah, I will always say Chris Sarandon, he can eat a fucking apple.
Now, all right. So question for all you guys: when it comes to the '80s series, favorite final girl? I mean, we know there's Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween. We know that there's Heather Langenkamp in Nightmare on Elm Street, so on and so forth. Is there anybody who's kind of the favorite for you guys?
Patricia Arquette in Nightmare
Ooh.
on Elm Street. Dream
That's a good
Warriors,
choice.
baby.
Good
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, it would have been I mean, it's a bummer that she didn't keep going on. That they're like, oh yeah, you're just gonna be recast.
Yeah.
Ugh, that was awful. That franchise could have been so much better if they would have just kept her because she's such a great actress, right? Like it would have changed, they would have had to change the story.
What about you, John? Favorite final girl?
I would definitely say Heather for sure. From the 80s, definitely.
She was the grand thrill, I think, for most of us in the '80s too.
Oh, yeah.
But Nev is your from 2000s, huh?
Yeah, from 2000s on. I mean, there's my ghost face behind me. I love the Scream series. Absolutely my favorite.
I will say too, since Patricia Arquette came up, Stigmata. Did you guys see Stigmata?
Oh, I love Stigmata.
So good,
Absolutely fantastic.
right? I liked, what was it? Night of the Comet. That was good. Nice
Oh,
and
that's a
cheesy.
good one. Or Night of the Creeps.
Yes.
Now, I gotta say, I will say, one of my favorite, and I consider it a one-off, even though they made a sequel. But I think one of the greatest '80s horror flicks in the world was Return of the Living Dead.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, they hit it so well. Um, the comedy was comedy. I mean, even the acting, for the most part, was a little bit better. You want to give it credit for, right? Um, that's that scene where the three of them are in the medical supply house, and a corpse has come to life, and they've killed it. And they're trying to kill it and figure it out, and just the completely frantic melting down where the actors are carrying on, and the soundtrack. I mean, like surf
Mm-hmm.
music, with distorted surf music in a zombie movie. Absolutely amazing.
All right. This has been a really fantastic episode. I feel like we could talk to you all night. Would love to have you on for a second episode if you're available and interested.
Absolutely. We could. I'd be more than happy. You guys reach out to me. We can put together a topic. I mean,
That would be
let's
awesome.
talk about the psychology of horror or something fun like that. Right?
Yes. I would love that. And we've got to talk about the Dagger Woods. So, with that said, for people that are interested in more about what you do, because you have an amazing site that you write when you write,
Exactly.
where can people find you and or connect with you?
So you can go to my website, which is lawandorder.com. It's LWA and order.com. You can also reach me on Facebook. It's Houngan James. I'm sure my name will be in the title of this episode, and you can just plug that into Facebook. You'll find me there. Yeah, I'm not too difficult to track down.
This has been such an amazing experience, and I'm so grateful that you came on. Guys, do you have any last thoughts before we wrap it up?
I know. I just want to say thanks for coming on. I think it was there's like a kinship here. I feel like we have a lot of similar interests, and I think we came from this very similar generation and of horror content, but also we're interested in outside of all the wondrous curiosities of the world, right? And I think that that's great, and I'm glad that we're able to do this and help us learn more, because we're always out here to learn, right? And we appreciate the knowledge that you can give our listeners. And yeah, it's great.
No, I think there's definitely a kinship here too. You guys are just fantastic. I've had a blast with this.
I do agree with BJ for sure. I also want to say that I will not look at Child's Play the same now. Um, when he's trying to switch bodies, I'm going to be like, no, Chucky, that's not how you do it. It's wrong.
I'd be like, we're so sorry, Double A.
Right.
Exactly. Call on some spirit that's at least dark and terrifying.
All right, John Thomas, you want to bring us home?
I shall bring us home. Thank you again, James, for coming on. Like we've all said, it's been amazing. It's been fun. We love learning. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, folks. And I look forward to talking to y'all again. You guys feel free to drop me a line. Ashley's got my contact. Definitely love to talk about a lot of this stuff with you guys more.
Heck yeah. And thank you to all of our listeners for listening to this episode of 3Haunted Podcast with your host. I'm John Thomas.
I am Ashley Lunar Goddess.
And I'm BJ Segura.
If you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 3hauntedpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media. You don't want to miss amazing guests like Mr. James here.
Also, don't forget to check out 3hauntedpodcast.com, where you'll find all of our past and current season episodes, as well as guest information and all kinds of awesome merch.
Until next time.